Again, and this time we're going to get into what ends up being the major determinant of how you read Bible and prophecy. Because prophecy is just another set of doctrines. Okay? So the same principle that you learn in seminary about how to interpret Scripture, and there are set rules the Bible gives you. Okay? You learn those rules, you follow those rules, and you will see a coherence to the Bible from Genesis to Revelation on any given doctrine. And it's really important to do that because, honey, millions of dollars, billions really, have been wasted on screwball, inept, crappy Bible scholarship. So when we're sitting here looking at how poor we are and how much money we need to deal with COVID and our other problems, a major cause, according to the Bible, the main cause of our having these problems is that we don't know Scripture. And we don't know Scripture because we don't study Scripture the way Scripture tells us to study. Okay? And when you're going to hear me talk about how to study it, it's like, well, I already knew that. Yeah, so why don't you use it? We all know the rules. And yet there isn't a single denomination on this planet, there never has been, that studies the Bible correctly. Now, it's easy to make mistakes. And it's not to condemn making mistakes. What is to condemn is that the mistakes don't get corrected for the same reason that Donald Trump is an asshole. He does something wrong, he won't admit it and fix it. That's the problem in Judaism. That's the problem in Islam. That's the problem in Christianity. All because we won't pay attention to the words. Okay? I know I'm ranting. But when you see how easy it is to know the rules and how beautiful these rules are, you want to smack yourself for not knowing it. Because they're not. The rules are not hard. We're just not doing them. Again, back to verse 1. What are the rules? They're the same for prophecy as for all other Bible doctrine, because prophecy is a way of expressing some doctrine you already know, but with respect to a particular future date. That's the only difference. Okay? So here we're looking at verse 1, which on the surface is talking about something that was happening then, so itself is not prophetical. But when you apply the meter to it and those rules, you are being told, hi, this thing that happened in 30 AD to introduce prophecy is itself prophetical of the next 40 years from when Jesus spoke. Now, only God would know that. That's why you know you're looking at the face of God when you learn this rule that, hi, there's 40 syllables in verse 1, it covers 40 years from 30 AD to 70 AD, and it's giving you what the Romans would call an epitome, a summary of history for those 40 years in the future. Okay, well, we're long past 70 AD. So we can check, we can verify, we can look at the period 30 AD to 70 AD and see how these words describe that time. So as we go through the chapter, okay, this chapter ends in 1703 AD, okay, which we'll get to, but it's going to be a long time before I get to it, because there's over 50 verses in this chapter. By the time we get to verse 51, the end of verse 51, where it's talking about weeping and gnashing of teeth, that characterizes 1703 in world history. Well, how is that possible? Well, you have to study the history to know. Okay? And in Matthew 25, our period that covers Trump specifically is right here in verse 11, where it says, Lord, Lord. That period of time is 2015, when Trump started to run for office, through 2018, when he basically capitulated to Putin. Oh, well, how do I know that's what it means? Good question. But before I can get this is where we're going. This is today, and then verse 12 is in the future relative to us. But how do I know how to read these verses here? I know because I start following the text from verse 1, which is basically telling me a story with particular words that get repeated, and it's the repetition, looking with it to that period in history to see what events in that history these same words depict. So when they are repeated, okay, like Jesus leaving, that will be repeated in 2065 AD. So I have to look back at, this is the same rule you learn in seminary for scripture. You have to look at the uses of the words in the Bible to know what the Bible verse you're looking at is saying, because it is an indissoluble part of the whole. Jesus left. He left because this is like to forecast the fact that he's going to die. He left because he wasn't wanted. And we know, as I explained in the last episode, he wasn't wanted because even his own disciples weren't talking about what he taught them. They're talking about, oh, the beautiful temple. Okay, so look at our keywords. Left, temple, walking, disciples, buildings. And we know this whole thing is a play on the temple and the building of the temple. Why? Because when Jesus leaves, church begins, and this time is the time of building church. You'll notice none of what I just said is actually stated in the text. Yet all of what I just said is stated in the Bible and uses the same key words. This is how a pastor learns to read the Bible. This is also how you learn to read prophecy. You don't take anything out of context. If you see the word left, Jesus left, that phrase will be repeated in these next 2 chapters several times. There is a technical word for that. It is called ANAPHORA, which means refrain, repetition, like row, row, row your boat. Okay, that's a repetition. In literature, a thing that's repeated, especially at measured distances, is repeated to tell you important facts about what happens between the repetition. This is especially true in legal contracts. Now, maybe you know an attorney and you can talk to him. I mean, I've done legal contracts for a living for 30 years before I got the cancer. So this is easy for me to understand, but it might be news to you. When you see the words Jesus left, the Bible is a legal book. It is a contract, a set of promises from God to you and me and every other human. It is a set of witnesses saying, hi, I'm God. This is my character. You got to decide if you want me or not. This is how I think. And if he's God, it's got to be really sophisticated. And even human literature uses these tricks here called anaphora, repetition. Jesus left. Temple is another repeated word. Walking is a very famous repeated word in Judaism for how you live the spiritual life. Disciples, that's his students. Matete, right there, or you can't see it. Matete, okay, students. And calling his attention to the building. They're telling him, but they're not listening. See? We're still on verse 1. All this stuff is coming out of verse 1. And of course, the actual text is in the Greek, so all these keywords are Greek keywords, not English. So the last 2 words, okay, here are tu hieru, the temple. Okay? You don't see the word temple that's in the NIV, but that's what it's talking about. It's not a mistranslation, it's just sort of idiom. Okay. So you see, Jesus left, temple, walking, disciples. Even the word came, calling his attention to buildings. All of these keywords are going to be repeated in the next 2 chapters. And the objective is to trace their usage because, as I explained, they're tied to syllable counts, which are speaking of a specific year. So when it says Jesus left, the actual word in Greek is kai exaleton ho Jesus ruedo. Okay? And he left, walking away, exiting, really. Okay? So the next time you see those words, they each have a syllable count. Kai, ek, zel, ton is 4 syllables. Ho, ye, sus takes you to 7 syllables. So that's 7 years after. 7 years after Jesus left, what happened? Pilate left. Tiberius left. So if you were a Christian knowing this meter and you're looking at it in 37 AD, you would do what I just did. Kai, ek, xel, ton, ho, ye, sus. Okay, that's 7 syllables. I'm now 7 years after Jesus died. And then you look at your life around you currently. Pilate is summoned to Rome, and Tiberius dies. So Jesus left, Pilate left, Tiberius left. And you say, oh, that's memorable. Yeah, it is, isn't it? Okay? You see, there's so much here. I'm only scratching the surface, but I need you to see this part. Now, in the next increment, I'm going to go through the entire world, what this verse 1 says about the entire world that you can check. Okay, so how do I get this stopped?